Hello, everyone, and welcome to the APT and Cybersecurity LinkedIn Live event. My name is Aaron Stillwell, and I'm joined by my co-host, Alex Mabro. Today, we're talking about scaling agentic AI safely. As organizations move from AI experiments to autonomous agents, the security and governance risks greatly increase. We're joined by Hanah-Marie Darley, co-founder of Geordie AI. Hanah brings deep experience from threat intelligence and AI-driven security, including her time at Darktrace, and now focuses on helping organizations safely scale agentic AI without creating new attack surfaces. Our goal today is always education first, breaking down what agentic AI really is, why it matters for security leaders, and how to approach safe scaling in practice. This is a live event, so drop your questions in the comments and we'll bring them into the conversation. Hanah, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So, Hanah, first question. Can you walk us through your journey and what sparked your interest in applying AI in security environments?
So much of it was seeing customers trying to apply it and really struggling and seeing the potential benefits of AI. I think, especially during my time at Darktrace, I spent so much time with customers who were in various stages of AI adoption. They saw the potential of the technology, but there were so many internal blockers, both from an understanding perspective, an enablement perspective, but also from a problem solution fit perspective. And I just felt like this is such a solvable problem. You guys can really get this benefit if you just get a couple of things right, if you just know a couple more things. And so I think a lot of it was customer time. Another piece of it is just exploring AI. We were talking a bit before we started about AI is such a big, expansive world. There's so many different applications and types, all the way from very basic Excel functions up to kind of deep learning and just really interesting applications. And all of that comes with the right problem solution fit, just like so much else in the world. So yeah, huge passion for it.
Awesome. So, can you give us an idea? How did your experience at Darktrace kind of shape your view of AI, not just as a defense tool, but kind of also as a potential attack surface or threat vector?
Sure. So for people who aren't as familiar with what Darktrace does, they do autonomous detection and response, so very relevant in the agentic era. And most of what you think about when you think about AI detection and response is really how do you get to AI versus AI? But so much of it is just how do you make the existing work that security teams have more efficient? How do
Yes.
you identify detection events that aren't just based on specific signatures, but are based on things that are outside of normal? How do I make security not just about staying ahead of threat actors, which is always a constant pursuit, but how do I try to dissect it even further to what's normal for my systems and how do I make my systems operate normally and consistently with little or at least less effort? And so I spent a huge amount of time there building out their threat research functions. So building out how we think about data across a fleet of customers and how do you analyze and cut the data and understand what threats look like in different contexts and across different regions. I spent a lot of time working with the product team around how you build out good explanations for customers. How do you explain the products that we have and how do we make sense of them together as a cohesive solution?
Yeah.
So I think the biggest chunk of my time, though, as I said, was spent with customers. I was one of the primary AI and cybersecurity experts. So I spent a lot of time hands-on with customers who were dealing with various security stacks and trying to make their processes efficient, ultimately so that their human analysts could do really interesting stuff, threat hunting, that's what everybody wants to be doing.
Yeah.
And they could do more with less. Every year, cybersecurity budgets shrink. And so how do we do more with less? And I think if you boil it down to most AI problems, that's kind of what you're doing. You're trying to do more with less, and you're also trying to make your work better, more efficient,
Correct. Yeah.
And
etc.
that's actually was a question, kind of next question I was going to is what are the kind of the key lessons from your early work influence, how you think about kind of scaling AI today? And I guess you kind of covered some of them already.
I'm happy to, though. I think the first one is something that I always talk about even now, which is always go back to the problem. What's the problem that you're trying to solve? Actually, when we talk about, statistics are all over the internet about how many AI initiatives are started and how many of them are succeeding, so much of that actually isn't about the technology. So much of that is about the expectations and about how you're thinking about adding new capabilities to an organization. So what's the key problem that I'm trying to solve? And if we isolate that, then we can understand what success is going to look like. How do I measure success? And so pretty much every time that we hit a roadblock with any of our customer projects, if we started asking, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? We actually got to a different solution most of the time than what we were working on, because we'd identified the problem as something else, or the team had aligned on something different. And there's so many possibilities. And so you start thinking of other use cases, but going back to the problem always. And then the second one is that AI is not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Yes.
It's really, really important to understand that different AI applications have different strengths and weaknesses. If you want to do a pattern analysis, supervised machine learning is really good for that. If you want to understand anomalies and unusual behavior, unsupervised machine learning is really good for that. If you want to understand how to think about spatial reasoning, you might go more towards the LLM side of things and look at the distance between words. But all of these have different value propositions. They all do different things well, and they all have gaps. There are always pieces of trade-offs where you're saying, this is the talent, but here's the space that it's not going to solve. So making sure that you're really clear on what that problem is, and then making sure that your application of AI aligns with that. Because one of the other challenges, and we talked about this a bit before the show, is we tend to talk about 2% of AI, but there's so much more out there. And so trying to make something fit just because we have the technology available, rather than it's a good fit for the problem that we're trying to solve.
So, Geordie was founded this year alongside fellow Darktrace alum, Henry Comfort.
Yeah.
What was kind of your aha moment that made you both decide kind of the market needed a company focused specifically on kind of safe, scalable AI adoption?
I would be remiss also not to mention our rock star CTO, Benji Weber. He has a storied UK tech background, but he's most prolifically part of Sneak's growth phase, and he was at a bunch of other really amazing tech companies. I think for all of us, we looked at the market opportunity for agents. If you start even a couple of years ago, you started hearing rumblings about agents, you started thinking about how workflows were going to change. And then if you think about all of the SaaS business that we currently do, pretty much all of that is going to be agentic in the next couple of years. And so when you just think about that one small slice before any businesses do anything else, then you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is prolific. This is the next big wave of technology. And then you start thinking about how businesses are going to dive in, how markets are going to change, how commerce is going to shift. You're like, this is the future of technology. Agents are going to be the future of work. Businesses are going to fundamentally think about labor differently because of this technology. And so for us, it was so obvious, the opportunity, but then also the drawbacks. One of the biggest challenges around any new technology is uncertainty, especially for security teams. They're being asked to enable this technology across the business. There's a huge range of use cases, and there's a lot of uncertainty and a lack of metrics around how do I actually evidence any of this from a risk perspective? How do I measure this? How do I start to think about this from an exposure perspective? How do I really safely turn these systems on for the business so that they can keep pace with their innovation goals without just going, well, all the best, 4-step security method, hope
good luck
as well. And so that for us was a real kind of catalyst moment of saying, there's a huge opportunity for businesses that is fundamentally going to shift the future of work. These little digital employees are going to be everywhere. But then also, there's a huge amount of education, uncertainty, and new technology that's needed to shepherd this in. And actually, that's where we took our name from. So we're called after one of the mining lamps from the Industrial Revolution, because every technology revolution has needed new technologies to help power that innovation, but also manage and mitigate the risks. And so the mining lamp was one way that you had coal mining that was really prolific for all of the technologies of the Industrial Revolution, but it also had invisible risks, very similarly to agents. You can't always see the risks with the human eye. You can't always be aware of them, but they exist. And so to minimize the suffering, to make sure that that innovation reaches its potential while safeguarding technology and people, really the mining lamps came in handy because they could shine a light on that invisible risk. And that's exactly what we decided to do with Geordie. We wanted to innovate, scale innovation, help businesses to adopt AI agents safely, but also while shining a light on and helping to manage the risks so that they could do it safely.
Awesome. Alex, I'll let you, I want to hand it over to Alex just for a second. I know he has a few questions.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Hannah, for all the answers. From a security practitioner perspective, what exactly is agentic AI, and how is it different from the AI models security teams are already familiar with?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question because I think it's one that whether we're willing to raise our hands a lot or not, a lot of people are asking themselves and trying to ask other people. So the first thing is that it's not traditional software, and I'm going to delineate that in a clear way,
Okay.
which is automation versus autonomy. Now,
Okay.
automation we're all really, really comfortable with. There's logic trees, there's if-then decisions. All of the decisions are predetermined and in most cases hard-coded. And effectively all that's happening is it's just executing. It's going through and it's executing processes that have already been decided. Autonomy is different. It's not executing if-then decisions. It's not based on decision trees. It's based on reasoning. And so
Okay.
whether or not you agree that LLMs can reason, that's a whole different ethics conversation. But the way that the decision is made is in the moment, in real time. It's not predetermined. And so that means that you fundamentally change the trajectory of what's possible. And it's non-deterministic. You can't always predict exactly what's going to happen within a specific workflow or within a specific agent. Now, on the upside, that's fantastic for productivity because it explodes creativity. It explodes the amount that you can get done. It changes the trajectory. You know, when people talk about 10xing, 100xing, that's really how it's possible, is that autonomy. Now, the trade-off is that you need to bound that autonomy because otherwise you have complete autonomy and you don't know what's going to happen at all and you have no change. So the minimum viable configuration for an agent is at least a reasoning core with a tool. Now, typically what we're seeing in the market, that's going to be a large language model, probably from a major provider. Maybe it's your own. It could be a small language model if you want, but typically it's going to be a large language model. And the tools are anything from APIs to MCPs, so model context protocol servers, to SaaS connectors, so into your normal applications. And effectively what that means is that you give a decision-making and reasoning entity access to affect the real world. And that's really the big change because you're going from something that is completely measurable. You can sandbox test it for 6 months and it's going to do the same thing every time. Obviously, there's vulnerability testing, there's good red teaming, there's all of that stuff. But basically, once you have a measure, you have a measure unless something fundamentally changes in the code. This is completely different. You can test it for 60 days, and on the 61st day, it'll do something totally different. And on the 250th day, it'll do something totally different. And on the 3000th day, it'll do something totally different. So it means that your predictability changes, and also your measures of accountability have to change. There's a huge amount around intent that becomes really important in a way that traditional software never has to.
You mean it's learning every time when you ask something, correct?
Sometimes they do. So it depends on how they're architected and how they're set up. Some agents will operate with memory and some will just operate with context windows. So it depends on how they're architected and also how they're designed to feedback. So some agents are designed with a feedback loop. That's going to be more mature constructions. And so you see something that will try to feed back into either a memory or a context window, what has been achieved or what has been learned. And especially if you have kind of corrections as you go. But actually the way that most systems are based from kind of out of box is going to be, you have a set of system prompts. These system prompts are like your employee manual. They tell you everything that you should do. They tell you everything you shouldn't do. And if you don't fill those out, effectively what that means is that every prompt that comes into the system is not evaluated through that lens, because the way it's designed is that those system prompts are like your first gateway for every prompt that comes into that system to check against whether I should do this or not. And then from there, it starts interpretation. So the agent interprets every request as well as the system prompts to go and pursue its operations. Now, on the upside, that means that it can pursue goals really efficiently, and especially if they're more task-oriented. So you have a lot of task in the system prompt, you have a lot of task-specific context in things like memory or knowledge stores or context windows. They can be really, really great and efficient at pursuing those goals. But the thing that's changing is that every time it's interpreting. You don't have a static input-output ratio that you're measuring every single time for how an agent is going to behave.
Interesting. I mean, I really like what I hear. I have a follow-up question for the first question, in fact, that I have addressed. Is it fair to think of AI agent as digital employees? Because this is what the people are saying when we speak about agentic AI. I'm thinking digital employee with goals, tools, and autonomy.
I think it's a really fair description. I think I should caveat, though, that not all agents are created equal. And so
Okay.
when you think about how agents come out of the box, there are a lot of providers that are low code and no code that will template specific agents. So Copilot
Okay.
Studio is a really good example of this. Dust is another example that comes to mind. And so essentially what you have there is pre-configured agents with a baseline set of system prompts, a shelf of tools that you can choose from, and they'll all have a very specific bounded autonomy out of the box. So
Okay.
there's only so much wiggle room that the agent will be able to have for doing things independently without prompting. Then there are agentic systems that you are building either on your own or you're using other platforms to build. And so you might be leveraging a framework like LangChain, you might be leveraging a bunch of different tools, but essentially what you're doing is you are expanding the scope of that autonomy to fit your purposes. And so you get kind of the spectrum, the evolution of man, that graphic, that's always how I think. There's a lot of there's very deterministic agents that can only do a couple of things, but therefore are going to be less useful to you compared to moderately deterministic agents that will have a set or scope of bounded autonomy, but they have some room for creativity and choice, and they have some more room for interpretation and independent action. And then there's autonomous agents that are operating, that are making their own choices, that are choosing everything from which tools to invoke to how to pursue a prompt. And within this scale, actually, Stanford has a really good kind of human autonomy scale that you can reference. Every single agent falls somewhere different on this scale, even from the same provider. And so when we talk about digital employees, it's really important to say that they are a really good reference point for how agents operate, because they're much more like people than they are like software. Again, they're making decisions as they go. In many cases, they're learning through context. All do the same thing. We search for knowledge to make the decision, and then we operate based on that knowledge, or we try to make the most efficient decision we can. Now, the key difference is going to be that digital employees don't always have the same accountability as humans.
Okay.
If Alex does something incorrect, I can come to Alex's desk and say, or I can Teams him and say, Alex, you've done something incorrect from a security perspective. Let me give you some remedial training, that we all love. Let me help you to understand where you went awry and let me correct it. Whereas with agents and with these digital employees, you might have multi-user agents. So you might have multiple people using the same agent. And you also have the agent's autonomy itself. So you have to govern intent where you say, is this the human user doing something incorrect? Or is this the agent going off topic or going off track and doing something unexpected? Because they're choosing which tools they're using to pursue their goal and how they pursue it. And so that's where you have a more varied scale and a slightly murkier pool when it comes to accountability. I once heard it said that agency and accountability are opposites.
Should not be this a risk? I don't know. In some cases, not all the time.
I think it is. I think when you think about the risk and reward, though, you always have to weigh those up. So the more deterministic, the lower the risk, the more you can guarantee the result. But the less opportunity for true efficiency you have. You just have less opportunity for big drastic changes or completely new capabilities, where that autonomy, the specific agency that is the risk, is also the reward. It's the thing that you can benefit from. And so effectively what you need to be able to do is continuously and contextually govern agents so that you get the benefit without having to trade off the risk.
Well, my vision over there is, monitoring, that's one of the things into AI, because you have to understand what he's doing, what kind of decision he's taking. And then you have to see if it's compliant in terms of controls. This is another thing. I know, you might say, Alex, you are more on the GRC. Yeah, my main focus is over there. But the idea is to have the control, not them to control you. That's the idea and the whole point over there.
You're reading out of our product pitch. That's exactly what we want to do. So, and that's exactly what we do with customers today. So 100%. And it's mostly about this dual lever of you're enabling adoption, and you need to enable adoption because otherwise your competitors will. There will be other people in the space who use AI and leverage it and get the most out of it. But you also have to manage the risk. And it doesn't mean accepting no new risks. It just means you have a really firm handle on exactly how the risk expresses and how you're mitigating it.
I would assume the boards are pushing hard to scale out AI as fast as possible. And I can only imagine from the CISOs we've talked to and the other security leaders, that the push they're getting from the board and other executives, that they need to move fast because they need to be competitive. And then you had the whole issues of the security and the risk and the compliance around that.
150%. So you have a lot of top-down pressure to adopt AI,
Yeah.
and you also have a sort of organization-wide pressure, which is kind of mid-tier down. So
Yeah.
people wanting to use AI, it's for most people becoming an employee value proposition. If we think about developers at the average organization, they want to be using coding IDEs. They want to be using Cursor or Windsurf or Devin or
Yep.
Claude Code. Most of our devs prefer Claude Code, but they want to be using these tools because it lets them stay at the front edge of what they're doing. It lets them be innovative, and it also, again, makes things efficient. It helps their workload to be more efficient. And so when you think about then how many different employees have an AI use case, how long is a piece of string? Everybody across the business has AI use cases, and especially
of course, everyone has Copilot attached, and they're all using it.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
especially
indeed.
from the board mandate down, for most businesses, it's you should be using AI first. How do you first think of AI as a solution when you come
Yes.
to a problem, and then start to build a business case around it? And so what you see in most businesses is kind of safe experimentation, where the security team is trying to enable them to test different products, but also not to just try everything under the sun, not to use their personal accounts, not to expose corporate data, but to try and set up a system of evaluations that is going to bring in these new platforms. Now, the trouble with that is what we talked about earlier, where you have a static risk assessment, you have a static evaluation of a platform, but you have a continuously developing and changing risk surface that isn't the same on day 60 as it is on day 1.
Yeah.
And so what you see a lot of is struggling to see past the trial phase into how this is actually going to affect the business. And especially from the security team, how am I going to continue to measure this? You were talking, Alex, about monitoring. How do I know what these agents are actually doing? How do I keep track of this beyond just a dashboard of sort of web services that are being visited? Or how do I build something beyond just a basic AI measurement to actually what is contextually happening within these agents? And of course, they want to enable the whole business, but at the same time, they're trying to be responsible, and they're trying to say, actually, we don't just want to blindly turn systems on that we don't understand and we aren't sure about the impact of.
Yeah. We have some questions also from the audience. Would you like to take it now or later?
Anytime you want.
Okay.
It's up to you, by the way.
It's up to you, yeah, in fact.
Yeah.
Let's take one now. We've built it up. Let's give the people what they want.
Okay, so we have one question from Rich. Do we have a picture, ConOps or OV to help guide our discussion?
I would say, in terms of most AI conversations, and I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think so as well.
So do we have some sort of a reference? Do we have some sort of a baseline? And actually, do we have consistent measures? And in the most case, for most part, the answer is no out of the box. So most providers really struggle to give visibility because they're building for functionality. And so it's not that they don't care about security. They really do, and they're doing their best to keep pace. But their primary function is make sure this works, make sure this performs the goal that it needs to perform. And so what tends to get left behind a little bit is documentation around APIs, a little bit slower around building out features that are focused on just the security side, because what they're trying to develop is that function itself. They're trying to get ahead in terms of how is this agent going to compete against other agents? How am I going to stand out in a very crowded market of agent builders? And so when it comes to how do I measure that as a business then? Well, if the provider doesn't give it to me, I either have to build it myself, which is very, very difficult. So the average agent could generate anywhere from 100 to 1,000 log lines a day. Thinking about that from a security scale, that would knock over most seams if you plugged in more than 2. So thinking about this then from the business perspective, even not in a very large enterprise, you're thinking about a huge scale of operations to try and measure this. And then when you're trying to think about how do I measure efficacy, how do I measure security, how do I measure baselines, outside of the security certifications of the platform, you don't necessarily have built-in controls. You don't necessarily have built-in functions. And part of the challenge is that the traditional security stack just isn't designed around AI. It's often AI blind, not because it's bad product, but because AI operates differently. It operates with different protocols. It operates across different mediums. And a lot of it can be self-contained. So it doesn't always have to happen across internet surfaces, which are typical choke points for transactions, and even if you get those transactions, they don't always make sense in context. What does that mean?
Yeah.
It access this server. Is that good? Is that bad? It went to this website for a knowledge graph. That seems fine. Trying to then put everything into perspective is really, really difficult. So I think for most security teams, no, they don't have anything. Most of the sophisticated security teams that I talk to have web service analysis. So they're looking across where their employees are using AI on web services to try and gauge, is our effective use or preferred use policy being engaged with? Is it understood? Is it accurate? And then how do we adopt our acceptable use into our effective use, and how do we bring those two together?
We have another question from Akshay. With digital employees increasingly operating autonomously across workflows, what do you see as the biggest unresolved cybersecurity risk? And of course, he provided some things over there, like technical exploitation, unclear accountability, or over trust by humans. And how should organizations realistically address it?
I'm going to go for D, none of the above, but I'll explain my answer. So I actually think it's silent failures. So I think you always have in any security system solution challenge the possibility of external manipulation. That's always there. Threat actors will always try to make systems vulnerable or to find a way into systems. That is an evergreen hazard. But actually with agents, most of the time when they're going off track, it's because they lack context. And so if you don't have monitoring, if you don't have a way to pull a needle out of the haystack and say, out of those 1,000 log lines, which of these is good, which of these is bad? How do I start to understand this agent's behavior? How do I start to measure its outcomes? How do I look across all of the agents across my business? Let's say I have 50 agents, which is quite small. A lot of companies will have 1 agent per employee. So if you think about 50 agents even, how do I make sure that they're operating on track? Most of the challenges for security teams are not going to be things like technical exploitation or open vulnerable tools. Those are always going to be challenges, but actually it's going to be silent failures. It's going to be the agent operating within its access permission, operating within its tool permissions, operating within it, if they have NHI, its identity permission, but doing things that are not in line with what the business wanted. That's not always going to be malicious, but it is potentially damaging. And so not only understanding what that is, but just understanding that there is an existential threat is going to be a real challenge with agents, because it's not the same transaction monitoring that you have in other security areas. So all of those are good challenges to be thinking about for security teams in terms of addressing it. So how do you actually get a handle on addressing it? The first thing is behavioral observability. When it comes to agents, behavioral observability is the guiding post. It is the Northern Star. It's what we aim for all the time. Because if you don't know what agents are doing, you're not going to be able to govern it, adjust your own policies, and of course, mitigate it. Now, the second piece is agent native or agent specific controls. Agents don't have kill switches. They don't operate the same way as traditional software. So when you're thinking about killing a process, when you're thinking about your existing levers of stopping something from a security perspective, you have 2 key challenges. Number 1, you risk the visibility. You risk the trace or the log being lost because of the session being killed midway through. The second challenge that you have is operational outage realities. The business is going to become more and more reliant on these systems. And just as if you're in any other area of the business, operational outages can be more important sometimes than security challenges. And so when you're thinking about how does this actually function, it's not just as simple as kill a process, stop the app, it's done. It's now potentially 3rd and 4th order effects because of the cascading touch points that agents have. They could potentially worsen the incident if you try to intervene midway through. And in some cases, you could again lose that visibility. So the most important piece is that you have agent-specific governance. And for 9 times out of 10, that's going to be context-specific governance. So we have a product called Beam, just to give you an example of what this looks like. And what it does is it enables you to avoid the risk whilst keeping operational resilience. So you don't have downtimes, you don't have block lists. You're not having to constantly go back and check, because every time you go back and check for a different governance policy at a different turn of an agent's task list.
It's like on control, right?
Latency. Yeah, there's a huge piece of latency. And so you're at 2 + 5 + 10, it's a lot, especially if you're at multi-turn requests. And so then when you go to contextual governance, essentially what you want to do is inject context into the context window, into the operating window of the agent, so that the agent knows about the risk in an agent readable way and can avoid the risk before anything bad happens. So a good example of this is vulnerable tools. So if there are vulnerable tools across either internal infrastructure or remote hosted infrastructure, you want the agent to know that that tool is vulnerable so it doesn't use it. And you don't want to necessarily do that through a block list, because that request has to go back and check against a tool list. It has to go back again, check against a governance policy. And so each time you're adding latency to that request. But instead, with contextual governance, you can immediately, in the reasoning cycle, identify that as a hazard, and the agent can choose a different tool without adding latency.
Interesting. Okay.
And I was actually going to go into that, Alex. That's a lot. You covered some good questions I was going to ask about the product. And, because you definitely, Geordie's described as an agent-native security platform, and you did a great job of breaking down what that kind of actually means.
Well, the most important thing for us is, I'm sure that agent native will quickly become a buzzword, and we really don't want that. But really what it means is our solution doesn't exist and doesn't work except for AI agents operating. If you don't have AI agents, our solution will be valueless to you. It won't help you. It's not going to solve your problems.
Don't tell your sales reps that, please.
No, it's not going to raise your children. It's not going to do your laundry. So essentially what it means is that it's purpose built for agents.
Yeah.
So where we help businesses, we answer 5 key questions. Where do I have AI agents in the first place? That visibility piece we talked about. You don't know what you don't know. And so you need to identify, not just for an inventory, but for an asset perspective. Where do I have these digital employees operating across my infrastructure? Then I want to know what they're capable of. What configurations do they have? What's my AI posture? How do I understand my agentic footprint and what these agents are capable of doing? What are these digital employees capable of doing job-wise? Then behavioral observability, our favorite thing. We want to understand what these agents are actually doing day to day. What are these agents up to? And how do I make sure I have auditable and immutable logs? And then finally, how do you get to exposure? How do I understand risk? How do I understand the piece around risk where I can start making changes? How do I make my organization as safe as possible whilst also enabling innovation? And then the 5th question is, what do I do about it? Which we covered in our proactive context governance technology beam. So where do I have agents? What are they capable of? What are they doing every day? What does that mean for my risk and exposure? And then how do I mitigate those risks?
Yeah, quick question for you. How have you seen the deployment lately with some of these organizations of these agents? Are they? We talked to some, and they seem to be nervous about deploying them too much, and they're worried about the threat. And then others are just going crazy with it. So, what have you seen kind of out in the field?
It depends on who you talk to. Apparently, 96% of businesses are deploying AI agents. I saw a sign at Black Hat that said there are 50 new agents added daily, and I said I would like to talk to that organization. But so, please send them my number. But I would say for most businesses, there is that safe experimentation that we talked about, where there's at least 1 or 2 pilots going on, and that ranges across build and buy. So in some businesses' cases, they've still invested a lot of time in building agents. I would say that was the last year or so, was people starting to build out agents themselves, a lot of SDKs and ADKs, and trying to build a product-based agent. And then there's a whole host of back office functions that they're bringing in external providers for now. They tried to build them initially. They did a lot of vectorizing of their databases, and they thought, oh my goodness, this comes out of the box for half the time and half the price. Why have we not just invested in that? Yeah. And so I think there's a huge cross-section of build and buy that is continuing to be the kind of predominant way that businesses enter the market. And then in terms of deployment, it's stratified use cases. Developers unsurprisingly lead the way. So almost 9 times out of 10, I would even go so far as to say 10 times out of 10, but 83% of statistics are made up. So I would say it's almost every time developers are using coding agents across most of the businesses.
Oh yeah, that definitely, yeah.
And then when you start to think about how that pans out, so then you have business-specific AI applications. So you have agent building platforms, you have low-code, no-code platforms, you have agents that are being built as product features. So most businesses are coming up with a way for agents to interact from a commerce perspective. So how does this agent do business, or how does my customer interact with this agent? Those tend to be the ones that have the most scrutiny because they have customer-facing realities or reactions.
Well, think about it. People's reality with it is when they call, their health insurance company, and they sit with they sit on the phone for 2 hours trying to go through questions. So they're hoping, I guess, that process makes it faster for them and more realistic.
Yeah, there's a lot of voice agents that are being deployed to help with customer service interactions. There's a ton of text-based agents that are already in operation across many different retail and tech sites. And even to some degree, some of the more regulated industries, they're starting to do it, but they tend to build more because they can guarantee the whole AI CI/CD pipeline compared to purchasing something off the shelf.
So a quick question, many security teams obviously rely on SIMs or some kind of risk intelligence platform. How does Geordie kind of integrate into existing workflow without adding, obviously, once you start doing stuff, it could add complexity?
Yeah, so from a human behavior perspective, there is no way to create a completely new workflow that is going to have zero operational friction. It's just not workable. It doesn't work with how people operate. It doesn't work with how businesses operate. So we have to plug into the existing security stack. And more than that, we want to partner with existing security businesses and teams who are already in specific workflows. They have ways of working and essentially be another key feed, but specific to agents. So the way that we do it for SIEMs, we just plug in as an alerting mechanism. For any risk feeds, we wouldn't tend to feed into something like a threat intelligence feed unless there's a specific vulnerability. So MCP vulnerabilities come through our tool as part of our risk exposure management. And so we might feed something like that into a threat
like feed. MCP servers, you mean?
Yeah. But most of it is going to be through the existing security analysis and triage workflows.
Gotcha.
MCP, for those who doesn't know, for the audience, means Model Context Protocol.
Yeah, Model Context Protocol. It's one of the most prolific agentic protocols, but it's really important to understand that because I always hear the question: would you bet your money on MCP or A to A? And I'm like, both. They do completely different things. That they will both be there.
Okay.
So Model Context Protocol essentially helps agents to have additional context through server transactions. So they're an advancement on what an API does. Agents still use APIs, no pun intended, that the bedrock of how they operate, but they also use MCP servers to gain additional context and also to transact back and forth about data and tools. So a lot of the tools or functions that agents can perform in the world are enabled through MCP. But agent to agent, or A to A, is how agents communicate with each other. So we already see multi-agent systems in operation. We see agents as tools, so agents calling other agents to perform specific functions. You often see that as a kind of a general agent and then a task-specific agent that's called to do a specific job or function. But all of those operate together. So you don't trade off MCP or agent to agent. You see it as kind of a continuum. So there's APIs, there's MCPs, and there's also agent to agent.
Okay, interesting, that part. I wasn't aware of that. Okay. So if you ask me, I think this can be used as well into the banking sector or financial sector as well.
100%. So in the US, there's already ACP, Agentic Commerce Protocol. So it was co-developed between Stripe and OpenAI, and it's already being used to process agentic payments. So basically, you have an agent that can work through ChatGPT, which is just ChatGPT with a connector. And then it can go and process transactions for you. So you want to order a new ski boots. You're really worried about your ski boot fit. You want them to perform really well. ChatGPT will go off and do research on the ski boots, and then it will come back and say, here's the ski boot I found. You'll say, sounds like a great ski boot, and then it will process the transaction and order it for you.
Do you think in Europe we'll have it soon?
Yeah, so Stripe said that...
I'm talking because I'm working for a financial sector, and I know how it's working. I don't see yet, at least in Romania, but not only in Romania, but also other countries, I don't see yet so receptive, let's say like that. And I don't know, banking wants to implement, but they're afraid. You know, over there are trade markets, and you have to be careful on the trade markets. They have all stocks. You have to be careful on the stock side and so on.
So Stripe says that it's coming to Europe in early 2026. Now, how firm a product deadline that is, TBC. But it's allegedly coming to Europe soon. And I think you already see a lot of, especially challenger banks, thinking about transactions. There's a lot of press about how, especially, I live in the UK, so how especially UK challenger banks are thinking about agent transactions. You see a lot in the retail space about how they're getting ready to process the volume of transactions, because that's really the shift. And so all of that is kind of agentic commerce, but there's a lot of movement, and it's very likely that it will come before the end of next year to Europe in some form or fashion.
Interesting. That's not bad. Good to know. With this occasion, I in cases if I have questions from my colleagues, because my colleagues are asking from time to time, do you think that in the future will be any AI dedicated for trade markets or stocks or those kind of? Now I know what I can tell them. I even can show
Well,
the.
you know the U.S. is going to be very different from the EU.
Yeah, I know. I mean, in fact, US was the first to it was open to this. In Europe, is different. It's we have a lot of regulatory over here, compliance part as well, and with all those regulatories and things, laws and so on, we are afraid of putting something in. But in US, people are open to this. Because they don't have so much regulatory, which Aaron knows that we have here, because we have DORA, which you have to be careful also over there. There are a lot of fines, regulatory as well, laws and so on. We have also, other than that, and of course, for each one of them, we have to be careful of whatever we implement or put in place. And this is why people in Europe are more careful. On whatever they are doing.
Cowboys, you know that.
Oh, yeah.
We're cowboys.
That's why you need the continuous monitoring, right? Because if you don't understand your own agentic footprint, there's no possible way that you're going to be ready for things like agentic commerce or understanding your transactions from external providers, or even being able to map them to how you do current business, how you do OpEx, how you think about any of your kind of core business functions. And actually, when we think about where AI is going, it's absolutely going to go more specific. I think that the huge benefit of agentic, when it's done really well, is that there's specific task orientation that can be sublime. Like the best AI agents are very, very narrow and deep technology. And so I think you will see a lot of stratification that is really, really specific, not only to regulatory conditions, but also to efficiency. So how am I going to do different processes? I think there's kind of a myth of like a generalist AI agent that can do everything, but the technology is designed to be context-based. So actually the more narrow it is, the more focused it is, the better it's going to perform day in, day out. And so I think that's what you'll see through the evolution of the next couple of years.
Is that better for security too, to make it more specific and more targeted?
I think it's net good. So it's net good for business, which means it's net good for security. I think it doesn't really challenge the paradigm either way for security. You still have the same fundamental needs, whether it's specific or not. It's more about the outcome and pursuing the business's goals than it is about the security exchange. I think the security exchange will always be that autonomy means that you have to have additional measures of accountability. You have to have additional ways that you're measuring systems beyond explicit transactions, beyond explicit ownership, and beyond explicit identity. There has to be a whole wave of kind of monitoring that changes because agents are such different technology than kind of traditional DOS software.
You have mentioned something earlier about myths. Looking ahead to 3 years, what do you see as biggest opportunities and biggest pitfalls for cybersecurity as agentic AI becomes more widespread?
I think the biggest opportunity is to embed security by design. Basically, nowhere else in technological history have we achieved this. We tried with cloud, we didn't quite make it. We tried with internet, that really didn't work. So I think when we're thinking about this is a next big wave of technology, we actually have an opportunity to embed governance at the start. We are at the beginning, we're at the cutting floor of this revolution. That's why it's so exciting to work on this stuff. But we have the opportunity as businesses to adopt security measures, to adopt governance before the horse is bolted from the cart and we can't keep track of it anymore. And we're just constantly playing catch up and trying to retrofit. We have the ability to do it from day zero. And I think that really is a huge opportunity. I think the pitfalls are going to be if we slow roll, if we decide to wait and see, we plan on using our existing infrastructure and we can kind of make it work, and we're not going to evolve any of our security technology. We're just going to try and collapse it in. I think by the time that you manage to retrofit anything, you're going to have such a lack of insight that you're not going to be able to catch up, and you're going to end up having to re-architect your whole system. So I think start early, start now, build agent-specific controls and monitoring, and really understand the difference between agents and software. Sometimes in those kind of pseudo agents or early agent examples, they're going to look really similar, but remember, the operating principle is fundamentally different. They are based on choice, they are based on reasoning, and they don't always respond directly to a prompt. They're not like large language models by themselves, in the sense that I always say, you know, you give me cookie, I give you cookie. You put it into a large language model and it'll give you something out, but agents operate differently. They go beyond this to make real world decisions and real world impacts. So making sure that we architect that in from a security perspective will put us light years ahead in the next 2 to 3 years of understanding your systems, of having positive controls, and also of being able to evidence all the great work that you guys are doing. Like, not having measures for that is not going to benefit you.
Yeah.
In terms of myth, because we were speaking about myth here, what's one persistent myth about scaling agentic AI safely that you would like to debunk for security leaders right now?
Gateways are the only option you have. I think gateways are fundamental and helpful. They do a couple of things really well. They can do rate limiting really well. They can do proxy connections really well. They can do specific protocol mapping very well. But they're not the only option that you have. You don't have to accept latency. You don't have to accept pretty cumbersome system designs in order to control agentic AI. I think it's kind of the classic myth of every system is controllable and we can get risk to zero. It's just not functional. And I think when you come to scale the business, it's not going to hold up to how the business actually operates. I think when it comes to gateways, they should be used in very specific parts of the business that are critical, and only those parts of the business. And the rest of the business, you need contextual governance that's flexible, but also resilient, so that you don't have operational downtime. Because the thing that's going to kill your business is blocking something that shouldn't have been blocked, even if you manage to instrument it. And again, you have to know about everything. You have to instrument it all properly. The burden really sits with you. And I think that that will really cripple a lot of security teams when they start to measure results and they start to measure how the business is going to scale this beyond just, again, 10, 15 agents. When it comes to the whole sprawl of all the ways that agents are being used across the business, I think it's really going to fall over. And so one of my big things is to know the value of solutions in context. So gateways like MCP gateways or proxy gateways, LLM proxies, they're valuable in specific contexts, but they're not going to help you scale the whole of your agentic security operations. You need agent-specific technology that is not going to be majorly latency introducing and is also not going to be dependent on you instrumenting traffic through it.
Okay, interesting.
So, Alex, I'm going to move to actually, Hanah, because we're getting kind of near the end, but I'm going to do a quick lightning round. Is that okay? Just short answers. Be politically incorrect as possible. Don't be.
No, we're live.
Don't. So here we go. First one. One word to describe the biggest risk of agentic AI done wrong.
One word. So my 9-word cheat is lack of results. But I would say failure in one word. You won't see the benefit of what you're trying to get out of it.
Okay. Number 2, one capability security leaders must have before scaling agentic AI.
Behavioral observability. Behavioral observability. Behavioral observability.
What's the company name again? Repeat it, please.
It's Geordie AI, but we love behavioral observability.
Number 3, biggest misconceptions CISOs have about agentic AI today.
I can secure it the same as I secured my LLMs.
Wow, that's a great answer.
Thank you.
Last one, one thing security teams should stop doing when thinking about AI risk.
Trying to use static security assessments to measure dynamic technology.
Fantastic. Alex, do you have any more questions?
No, I think we covered most of the thing. I don't know. Do you think we'll be more mature in 7-10 years?
Oh,
the AI?
I think it really will. But again, AI isn't just large language models. I mean, all that's happening with world models, all that's happening with large reasoning models, hierarchical reasoning models, the continued advancement of unsupervised and supervised machine learning and other types of deep learning. Like, there's so much happening in the world of AI research. We spend time talking about like 2% of it, which is large language model benchmarking, which is great and it's lovely, but there's so much more going on. Absolutely. There's a huge world of AI opportunity. I'm an AI optimist. I really think that AI is humanity, and all this technology is going to benefit business. We just need to know how to use it properly, what problems we're trying to solve, and we need to have governance in place that's built purposefully to help educate the security team and also help them keep track of it and keep controls around it.
That's awesome.
I'm sure many people will leverage from this. I mean, AI could be a good help for them. There are people with different issues, and those
I think,
people.
Alex, one of the biggest things is people they're already deploying it.
Yeah.
And it's going to get to the point where, you're right, it moves from 10 to 100 to 1,000 agents running. And then they do not have the security infrastructure in the background, the governance, everything else to be able to manage it. And then it's too late because it's so already integrated into the business environment. You can't just switch it off. You can't turn it off because it's
Will be like a botnet in the end. I mean, botnet is different. It's the same, but it's different from the AI in the end.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, Hanah, thank you so much. What's the best way if people want to reach you, or if they want to contact you or contact Geordie, how do they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is geordie.ai, geordie.ai. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Hanah-Marie Darley. You can find our company page, Geordie AI, on LinkedIn. You can find my co-founders, Henry Comfort or Benji Weber. We are all accessible and we would love to chat. So feel free to follow us there. I also tend to provide a lot of this information on my LinkedIn. So I try to give as much information as I can about kind of AI news and also governance changes and, of course, our lovely product.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it off. If you want to stay on for a second, that'd be great.
It's been a pleasure.